Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Karina Robinson, co-director of the Inclusion Initiative with my colleague, Associate Professor Grace Lorden. This new research centre at the LSE launches this very week, and it brings together behavioural science and data to create more inclusive cultures. Over the next year, you can expect a steady stream of rigorous and relevant research from the Inclusion Initiative. We're currently working on a number of fantastic projects, which range from exploring how artificial intelligence can be used to promote inclusion in the workplace, to considering how luck versus effort is attributed across groups, to quantifying how COVID-19 has affected workers in the UK and what can be done to deal with this. Do follow us on Twitter at LSE_TII, or sign up to our newsletter, and both of those addresses will be in the chat box. Now, enough PR, let's get to business. The event will be recorded, and please pose questions in the chat box. This is the first of our Open Door, Open City monthly webinars. The name speaks for itself. We aim to open the door to the city and to business, and to ensure that all the talent we bring together is included in the conversation so that we can breed a culture of innovation, of openness, and of productivity. Now, we are very fortunate to have Lord Karan Bilimoria with us. He's actually, at the moment, I can see, getting rather busy for another speech he's got to give at the House of Lords a bit later. You will have seen his bio. It would take me most of this webinar to go through it. We don't have time. So I'm just going to concentrate on three things. Founder of Cobra Beer and now chairman of the Cobra Beer Partnership, which is a joint venture with drinks giant Molson's. Founding chairman of the UK-India Business Council, and a race campaigner wearing one of his many hats as president of the CBI, the Employers Organization. Karan, a very big welcome to Open Door, Open City.
Thank you, Karina. It's great to be here.
First, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with the definition of inclusion that we use in the Inclusion Initiative. We say that within the firm, diverse voices should be heard in collaborative discussions, and leaders must work to bring the missing voices into the firm to aid its purpose and profitability. Is this something you share, this view?
I think that people use the term diversity and inclusion and D&I together. And I think it's very important to make the distinction between the two, between diversity and inclusion. And in fact, I'm an alumnus at Harvard Business School through executive education, and I keep in touch with the alumni news. And I came across this article in the Harvard Business Review very recently that said, diversity is useless without inclusion. And that's the whole thing. Diversity is a must. It's the right thing to do. It makes business sense to do it. But without the inclusion, the diversity won't work. And the inclusion is all about creating the culture, having the mentoring, and allowing the diversity to flourish.
You mentioned the business outcomes, and I mean, I could quote McKinsey, the Harvard Business School, countless other studies that show that diverse and inclusive firms actually give you better, more sustainable profits.
Well, if you...
Why do we still have to convince people of this?
I mean, if you look at the McKinsey, you quoted McKinsey, I mean, recent research basically says that more diverse organizations and boards make better business choices, exhibit greater growth and innovation, and carry lower risk. And one of their surveys recently and piece of work showed that in the case of ethnic and cultural diversity, the top quartile of companies outperformed those in the fourth by 36% in profitability. So not only is diversity and inclusion the right thing to do, it makes business sense as well. It works and is more effective.
To enhance inclusion in a firm, and you mentioned earlier, but you need targets, you need accountability, you need mentoring, sponsoring. And what about tying middle managers' compensation to results?
So when, again, creating this whole environment, I presume, are we going to talk about the initiative that I've just launched?
Well, that's exactly what I'd like you to talk about now, how you're going to take that forward.
Yes. So I was appointed as the first ethnic minority president of the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, in its 60-year history. And when you're appointed as vice president for a year, where you shadow the existing president, and that's what I did from June 2019 until I took over as president in June this year. And this is well before Black Lives Matter. This is something that please forgive me, I've got a dog that wants to go in and out at the moment. So this is the joys of working from home in your study. So there are 3 dogs and a cat. So I spent that year shadowing the president, but also coming up with my plan as president of the CBI and the first ethnic minority president in its 60-year history. And I had 4 pillars for my presidency: entrepreneurship, championing entrepreneurship, championing global Britain, particularly having left the European Union. How are we going to continue to be a global power and be one of the top 3 attractors of inward investment in the world, and promoting our exports and promoting all that's great about Britain. The third is to get universities and business working more closely together. So as Chancellor of the University of Birmingham and the various roles I hold at Oxford and at Cambridge, I'm passionate about higher education, and I'm passionate about business and universities working together, particularly with a focus to research and development and innovation, which I think is crucial to the future of this country. And the fourth is that I wanted to encourage and champion ethnic minority participation in business across the board. And when I looked at the landscape and I said, now, how can we start this? Where do we start? We came across the Parker Review. And the Parker Review, Sir John Parker, David Tyler, commissioned by the government to look at ethnic minority participation on boards. And they published in 2016, 2017, and they set a target that there should be at least 1 ethnic minority board member on every FTSE 100 company by 2021, and 1 ethnic minority board member on every FTSE 250 company by the end of 2024. And in early this year, around February, they carried out a review of the Parker Review. And they said, what progress has been made? And here are the stark facts that as at earlier this year, 37%, so almost 40% of FTSE 100 companies do not have a single ethnic minority board member. And in FTSE 250 companies, 69%, so almost 70% of FTSE 250 companies do not have a single ethnic minority board member. So we said, well, let's start with that. Let's champion achieving the Parker Review targets. And in the same way that the 30% Club championed the Davies Review a decade ago about women on boards. And I really believe that without what the 30% Club did, we would not have achieved where we are today, where FTSE 350, it's actually 33% of board members are women, and there's only 1 FTSE 350 company that does not have a woman on the board. So we want to do what they did and champion the Parker Review. But we said we're going to go further, and we've got 4 things that we want to do. So one is to actually implement the Parker Review, to have this target and try and achieve it by 2021 and 2024. We then also want to encourage it in the pipeline, so the ExCo -1, and eventually throughout the business. The next is the transparency. We want companies to actually disclose the things like the ethnic minority pay gap, which exists, and that should be disclosed, we believe, by 2022. That should be disclosed. And also all these targets and all the figures should be disclosed. And also there should be the inclusion. So we want companies to actually create that culture, have the mentoring, to have the inclusion. So that's what we're doing with Change the Race Ratio. And I'm so happy to say it was launched last month, and it's been a great success. We've had founding members, we've had Deloitte and Brunswick and companies, the business in the community, Cranfield Business School, City Mental Health. We've had obviously CBI leading it, Linklaters, Microsoft, Russell Reynolds, all getting behind it. And now we're signing up members, and members sign up to commit to this across all businesses, of course, not just the FTSE.
You talk about, I think, and this is something hopefully that we've learned from the 30% Club, the pipeline is one of the most important areas. And to create the culture that helps that pipeline along, what do you think are some of the most important policies that companies need to apply?
So the first thing is to be aware of the issue. And I think we're creating this awareness that there is a problem and we need to deal with it. And the next thing is to actually set the targets and have that transparency and accountability and create that environment. But because you can tick a box and say I've done it, but it's no good if you actually make it happen and make it work. And similarly, it's this accountability, transparency. That's why I'd say it's all four things: to increase racial and ethnic diversity amongst board members, to increase racial and ethnic diversity in senior leadership, to be transparent on targets and action, and to create a culture in which talent from all diversities can thrive. So you've got to do all of it. And what is great about the board part of it is, I think, the inspirational aspect, the role model aspect is very important, because somebody starting at the bottom can say, if he or she could do it, I can do it. If they could get to the top, because that inspiration creates aspiration within the younger people. That aspiration leads to achievement, which in itself creates inspiration, and it's a virtuous circle. So it's very powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you and I share a number of things. Same sort of age. Let's call it middle age. Okay, let's call it middle age.
No. I'm not middle age. Middle age starts at 60, and old age starts at 80 nowadays.
That's fine then. Good. Settling in a country that we didn't grow up in. Beneficiaries of a relatively privileged background. And one of the things that worries me about where those of us who are campaigning on things, whether it's BAME or whether it's women, whatever it is that there's this assumption that white males, for instance, have no voice in this. Well, I think actually they can be the biggest allies and champions, or that those from a privileged background can have no voice, etc., etc. And this seems to be a trend that I'm slightly concerned about. Are you?
Well, look at the Parker Review. Who led the Parker Review? In your words, two white males. I mean, Sir John Parker and David Tyler. So, and we have amongst our ambassadors and our champions for Change the Race Ratio, it's a cross section. And it's very important everyone gets behind this. And again, I go back to my own personal experience in building Cobra Beer from scratch, where there were just two of us who started originally from Hyderabad in India. And both of us living over here in the UK. I just finished my studies. I had this idea for Cobra while I was a student studying law at Cambridge. And it was an idea. Now you put your idea into action and you start as there's this term SME. Well, in India, they use the term MSME. They don't say SME because the M stands for micro. Most businesses start as a micro business. There were just two of us with £20,000 of student debt to pay off. Then we became an S, then we became an M. And now, as you say, we've got a joint venture with one of the largest brewers in the world, Molson Coors. So I've been through all the stages of building a business from scratch. And I remember when we started building our team, if you had come into Cobra Beer in those early days as we're building our team from, getting up to 10 people and 20 people and just building in numbers, it was literally a mini United Nations. We had people from different countries, different religions, different backgrounds, and that diversity was so powerful. And people from Canada, America, Europe, South Asia, East Asia, all over the world. And it was just South Africa. I mean, it was very powerful, that diversity of mindset, that diversity of approach, the buzz that it created. It was a mini United Nations. And I think it was a huge part of why we were so creative and innovative and grew so rapidly and created this household brand from nothing.
Actually brings me to a point. This morning, I was on a call with the immigration minister, Kevin Jackson. And one of the things, it was the Entrepreneurs Network organized it. And one of the issues that was brought up again and again with him is that in some ways, the new immigration policy from January 1st is very open, but it's very open to tech. This government seems obsessed with tech, but it's not open to entrepreneurs who say, for instance, very successful restaurateur in France who wants to come over, start a whole new restaurant empire, hire loads of people. Anybody who's not in tech has a more difficult time. What do you think about this immigration policy?
Well, we as a country had a very hostile immigration policy, openly known around the world as a hostile policy, particularly with regard to students, for example. When I remember campaigning in Parliament, I've been in Parliament now for 14 years. And in 2007, I remember campaigning for a 2-year post-graduation work visa for international students. And I remember at the time I tabled a question in Parliament. I got cross-party support in the House of Lords. The education minister at the time listened. And in 2008, the 2-year post-graduation work visa was brought in. And as a former international student myself, that was phenomenal because it is expensive to study in this country. The fees, the living expenses, just getting here. And to be able to earn some money after you graduate, to pay for your education, to gain some work experience, to build the bridges, to build the generation-long bridges. It's phenomenal from a soft power point of view. We contribute to the economy over here. You pay taxes. It's a win-win all round. It worked brilliantly. And the numbers of international students went up. We were always the highest along with America. 2012, Theresa May, as Home Secretary, removed that 2-year post-graduation work visa and reduced it just to 6 months. And you could see the effect straight away. And I've been campaigning since then, as have others, to bring it back. And I chair the all-party parliamentary group on international students. I'm president of UKISA, the UK Council of International Student Affairs. It looks after the interests of all 450,000 international students in the country. So from 2012, we fought and fought and fought. And as long as Theresa May was Home Secretary and as long as she was Prime Minister, it didn't get anywhere. The moment she left, Boris Johnson came in. They've brought back now, they announced the bringing back of the 2-year post-graduation work visa. I think that's fantastic. In 3 years, if you do a PhD. And you just see the interest from a country like India. We've got now Professor Sir Steve Smith, who's a national champion for international students. He's just stepped down as Vice Chancellor of Exeter University after almost 2 decades. And he said, when it was announced, even before it's come into effect, the interest from India, the applications from India went up by 312%. So having a positive, and all the surveys showed, this is from the government's own surveys, from their migration surveys, showed that the number one reason that foreign students did not choose the UK as their number one choice was the lack of post-graduation work opportunities.
Yeah, but no, Karen, I think that's great. And I agree the government's done a great job. But are you avoiding my question? I asked myself.
No, I'm actually I'm trying to paint a picture where you can have a hostile immigration policy that is really damaging. Yeah. And if you change that, it can change very quickly to the benefit. And we cannot have an immigration policy, particularly after leaving the European Union, that is damaging to our economy and our country. Because I think that the 15% of this country who are from the ethnic minorities, the contribution that we have made to this country. I led a debate in Parliament a few years ago, and I had peers from different religions and different backgrounds and different countries of origin who spoke in that debate about the contribution to the economy and the culture of this country. If you read the Hansard of that debate, we would not be the 6th largest economy in the world without the contribution of immigration to this country. We benefit from it, and we've got to continue to have the immigration that we require.
Do you think the government should make a few more tweaks to
They will have to. They will have to. They've already had to. They set a minimum salary of £30,000. For example, in the Indian restaurant, now wearing my Cobra Bear hat, we supply 7,000 Indian restaurants. For years, they've been struggling to get the chefs that they need from South Asia. Mm-hmm. And yes, we're trying to train them over here as well, but you also need to bring in the top chefs from India. But if you bring in a chef and you have a minimum salary of £35,000, and it's reduced to £29,000 if you don't do a takeaway. Now, even a Michelin-starred restaurant does a takeaway. And then
nowadays, a few of them, but anyway, yeah.
But it's much more expensive than the average salary of a chef over here, and you've got to bring them across. So it became very difficult for them to do that. So an industry that employs hundreds of thousands of people, contributes billions of pounds to its economy, was not able to bring in the staff that it required. And this, you can look at this across the board, and setting a salary threshold is a very crude way of doing it.
So you
Because
think the
very
government,
talented people, like, for example, in the creative industries, you have ballet dancers, you have people in the theatre who may not necessarily earn a high salary, but they're highly skilled.
so you think the government has a certain amount of flexibility to changing this new immigration policy if a
Well,
bit of campaigning takes place?
they've already flexed it. They went down from 30,000, they've gone down to 25,000. They made exceptions, for example, for agricultural workers that are required. They've made certain exceptions, and they will have to do it depending on what's needed beyond tech.
Okay, good. Now, putting your Cobra hat on again, getting hold of money compared to when you started Cobra Beer, getting hold of capital is easier, theoretically, but is it easier for BAME entrepreneurs?
When I started in a recession. And at that time, interest rates had gone up to 15%. So not only were you in a terrible economic environment, not only was it difficult to raise money, but even when you did, it was really, really expensive. So starting a business at any time, you can start a business right now in the middle of this pandemic is one of the biggest financial crisis we've faced, an economic crisis in 300 years. But it's still, you can start a business now. What is different is now that the help that exists for entrepreneurship is leagues ahead of when I started Cobra Beer 30 years ago. The entrepreneur networks, all governments, whatever political party, whether it's a conservative liberal coalition, whether it's a Labour government or a conservative government, they all champion entrepreneurship across the board. So that's great. And they also, the entrepreneur networks that exist are phenomenal. And then the access to finance has just escalated, not only in terms of what government provides through the government guaranteed loans that exist, which we're now learning from the crisis. I think when we go back to the government guaranteed loans after the crisis, we've got to have them more effective and more available and more accessible in the way that these 100% bounce back loans, 1.2 million of them have been made and saved thousands of jobs and thousands of businesses. So I think we do need to learn from it. And then, of course, things like crowdfunding. That didn't exist.
Yeah.
So it's much better for entrepreneurs now, and we're one of the best countries for it in the world.
But we have a researcher, and she is a Black entrepreneur, and she found, in the end, she managed to start a load of businesses, but she's researching for her PhD how much more difficult it is for BAME entrepreneurs. And is this part of the change the race ratio, your campaign in any way, or is this something you see as apart from it?
So when I say championing ethnic minority participation in business, I mean business across the board. And how can you have business without including entrepreneurs? So absolutely. And if you look at the ethnic minority entrepreneurs in this country, I mean, example after example of how so many of them have done incredibly well. It's not just over here. If you look at the Silicon Valley startups, so many of them are from foreign students. And so this is a phenomena. And here I'm an example. I came from India to study over here, and I came up with my idea while I was a student over here. So I think that we've got to champion entrepreneurship. Absolutely.
Okay. What do you see? You mentioned COVID and some of the lessons we can learn. What do you see as sort of some of the damage that seems to have been done is more to BAME individuals than it is to others because of their frontline roles and socioeconomic circumstances? But there's also, and let's focus on the optimistic here, there's also this build back better idea. And people can be cynical about it, but everybody's trying to figure out how we can do things differently.
Well, the term Build Back Better, the CBI, we sort of take credit for first having used the term, but it's become a cliched term. But it is real in that how can you, having gone through such a crisis now for 9 months, how can we, and it's going to carry on, we're not out of it, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we can discuss that further if you'd like to. That's why I think I'm very confident we're going to come out of it and bounce back quickly and bounce back better. It's how does this resilience that we've managed to experience and show as businesses, as entrepreneurs, combined with an adaptability at speed, that's going to enable us to be stronger going forward. And when it comes to the ethnic minorities, if we look at the COVID, it sadly affected certain people more than others. So elderly people have been affected by far the most. I mean, the average age, I think, of somebody who sadly passed away is 83 years old from COVID. People with underlying health conditions are more susceptible, whether it's heart disease, whether it's obesity, whether it's diabetes, makes you more vulnerable to it. And the ethnic minorities overall have been shown to be more vulnerable. Now, I've spoken in Parliament about this. They're doing a lot of research into it. And even when it comes to vaccine, when you get the priority of the vaccine, the 20 million people who've been prioritized to get the vaccine in an order that the vaccine task force has come out with, starting with the most vulnerable in care homes and care home staff and NHS staff, and ethnic minorities are included within that 20 million.
Light at the end of the tunnel. Tell us why you see some light at the end of the tunnel.
I see it because I think that we have, if you look back to where we were in March, when we went into lockdown, we were testing 2,000 people, literally 2,000 people a day. And that's what we'd got to. And look where we are today, at the back where we now can do rapid, mass, affordable antigen testing with lateral flow devices that give you a result in 10 minutes. We're now going to have the ability to have widespread mass testing, which will be an absolute game changer in trying to stay on top of the virus. Vaccines, vaccines that take 7-8 years to develop, if at all, and sometimes you don't get a vaccine at all. And here we are, we've got 3 vaccines already that have proven to be successful and soon will be authorized and in the market. And therapeutics. If you look at the therapeutics, there are repurposing of drugs like dexamethasone that reduces the sad deaths by 30%. Then you've got recently an arthritis drug just announced a few days ago that in elderly people reduces the chance of death by 70%. And then you've got others that you haven't even heard of, one or two, very rarely heard of, that are being repurposed, that people on oxygen or on ventilators can reduce their chance of death by 80%. So when you have the chance of dying from this dreadful disease being so drastically reduced, it really changes everything. So you take those 2 things, therapeutics, mass testing, 3 things in the vaccines, not the Prime Minister's 2 gloves to pummel the virus, they're 3 gloves in my view. Yeah. And then you take all the government help that's been given to try and save the jobs and save the economy at a huge cost. Yeah. Combined, it will see us through till about spring next year. I would imagine around April, we'll start to get back to normal as an economy.
We like optimism. We like it a lot. Now, what about another hat you wear, and one of your many, which was India, the India-UK relations? You've been chair. Now, it's very difficult to keep track of everything you've been, Karen, okay? It's very difficult. But chair of the Business Council, I think the founder of the chair of the Business Council UK-India, and the Lord Mayor, William Russell, is actually on a virtual visit to India this week, because, you're talking about 2 really exciting markets where we can get a lot going. How do you see that relationship developing?
Yes, in fact, just yesterday I was in a roundtable organized by the sister organization of the CBI in India, as the CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry. And they'd organized a roundtable with UK parliamentarians and Indian parliamentarians with an Indian cabinet minister. And of course, we're discussing the UK-India relations and the potential. Now, the trade between the 2 countries as we speak is about just under £25 billion in goods and services both ways. Now, you put that in context. The whole of the Commonwealth, which includes India, so India makes up half the population of the Commonwealth, 1.3 billion out of the population of 2.5, 2.6 billion in the Commonwealth, of over 50 countries, 54 countries. And that includes Australia, New Zealand, Canada, India, small Caribbean islands. All of them put together make up less than 10% of our trade as a country. That is how stark it is. America, USA, is our #1 trading partner with 15% of our trade. Then the European Union as a bloc is about 45% of our trade. And if you look within the European Union, Germany is 9%, is our second biggest trading partner. Our third biggest trading partner is the Netherlands, Holland, with about 7%. So if you see that the top three, each individually is more than the whole of the Commonwealth, or equivalent to the whole of the Commonwealth combined. Yeah. So we've got a lot of potential to increase business and trade with a country like India. And it's not just the trade and the business, it's our relationship with India on the whole, whether it's security, whether it's our armed forces, whether it's space, whether it's education. At the moment, foreign universities are not allowed to open up campuses in India. Now at Birmingham, we're just opening up a brand new campus, first Russell Group University to open up in Dubai. There are many universities, if India opens up, will open up campuses in foreign universities, including British universities in India. And so that's another big opportunity looking forward. So we are scratching the surface when it comes to what we could be doing. And of course, the investment by Indian companies in the UK. India is one of the biggest investors in the UK, and Indian companies employ hundreds of thousands of people here. Example like Jaguar Land Rover is one example. It's owned by Tatas.
As somebody who, you were talking earlier about, when you have an ethnic minority representative on a board, what an incredibly inspiring thing that is for a younger person going into that business. Now, I know you have, I think it's 2 sons and a daughter, if I'm right. And what advice would you give them about getting ahead in business? Now, given that they are your children, they'll probably pay no attention to you, but loads of other young people, including those on this call, would very much like to hear, after this successful career, what have you learned that you'd like to sort of impart?
Well, Karina, firstly, I've got a boy, girl, so 2 boys and 2 girls. And one has graduated from university and is working. The boy, the one is at university. Number 3 is at university, and the youngest is still at school, who's going to go to university in 2.5, 3 years' time. And what I would say is that if you just I look back at the time I've been here since I was a student in the early 80s from India, and I see how much this country has transformed. In the 1980s, this country's economy in the early 80s, it was known as a sick man of Europe. It was a country going nowhere, a country that had this big empire, didn't have the empire anymore, had very little natural resource, a bit of North Sea oil and gas, and it was a country going nowhere, an economy going nowhere. There was a glass ceiling. I was told by my family and friends in India that if you decide to work after your studies in Britain, you will not be allowed to get to the top because you are a foreigner and you will not be allowed to get to the top. And they were absolutely right. There was a glass ceiling. And then the economy opened up in the 1980s, the mid-80s, late 80s. You had Big Bang in the city. You had entrepreneurship being championed. And I saw in front of my eyes this glass ceiling being shattered. And I saw that this country transformed from having a glass ceiling to a country where you can get anywhere regardless of race, religion, or background. And that progression has been taking place. If I give you a quick example, when I was at University of Cambridge, late 80s, big event in 1987 at the elections, first 4 ethnic minority members of parliament were elected, including Bernie Grant, Diane Abbott, Paul Boateng, Keith Vaz, and there was one, by the way, in the House of Lords of Indian origin who'd been at university with my mother at Birmingham. So there were 5 of them in 1987. In 2012, we had a 25th anniversary photograph on the steps of Westminster Hall, the 900-year-old building in Parliament. There were 69 of us, from 5 to 69 in 25 years. Just now, after the elections in December last year, we had photographed ethnic minority members of both houses. There are now over 100 of us. So we've made progress, but if you look at 100 as a percentage of the members of parliament in both houses, that's still only about 7%. So it's still half the proportion of the 15% ethnic minorities in the country. So we've still got a way to go, but we've made huge progress. And that's what I would say is there is no limit to how far you can go in this country. Well, look at the Chancellor of the Exchequer is the British Asian. So, it's only a matter of time, but we'll have ethnic minority prime minister in this country.
Yeah. Although some people, of course, would say being a chancellor is much more important. You're in control of the money. Very important. Now, just to be negative for one moment, Karan, what keeps you awake at night? What worries you?
Well, what does worry me is if we ever regress with the progress that we've made as a country in terms of this wonderful country that celebrates diversity. We don't tolerate diversity. We don't tolerate other religions. You celebrate all religions. You celebrate diversity. You celebrate aspiration. And I think we've got to keep that open-mindedness, outward-looking, embracing attitude as a country. And that will enable us to continue as 1% of the world's population to still be the sixth largest economy in the world and still be one of the top 3 attractors of inward investment in the world.
Very good. Now, we're going to be taking some questions from the audience, but with a bit of favoritism, I'd like my co-director, Grace Lorden, who can come on now, who is a professor of behavioural science, an economist, data science at the London School of Economics, and I'd like her to be able to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and doing the interview. So I guess you started off talking about, entrepreneurship, and, one of the things that I'm really focused on is the future of work. And some of what you said about, Britain embracing kind of diversity and inclusion rings true to me. One thing that keeps me awake at night is, the progress since the 80s has actually widened, inequalities. And when we think about the fourth industrial revolution, the current government really wants to kind of start pushing those back. And they're doing these reforms around, further education, higher education. And kind of, if I was to ask you for your kind of one thing that you would like to see the government do that kind of insulates the future of work from even further inequalities in the future, what would that be?
Yes, and it's a very important point. And the government talks about it leveling up. I mean, it's again, another very sort of cliched, a very, very cliched term. But the objective is very good in that you want to make sure, I mean, when I talk about the inward investment that we get, that is phenomenal, a disproportionate amount of it comes to London and the Southeast. So how can we have the prosperity spread out around the whole country? And I'm Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, and Birmingham is the second biggest city in this country. And you can see that over the years, our cities have really advanced in many ways. We look at Birmingham and Manchester and Leeds, and they're really dynamic cities. They're great cities. So that has been happening. We need to make it happen even more. But the one thing is, it goes back to last November, a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, perhaps to the day almost, I was a member of the Centenary Adult Education Commission. And it's centenary because we worked through the whole of last year, 2019, to produce this report, this commission, because it was based on the Adult Education Commission in 1919, straight after the First World War, where you had this horrible war and you had millions of people to rehabilitate and to get ready for work and skills. And you reading that report 100 years ago, the challenges are so similar 100 years later. And what we recommended and this is before the pandemic, by the way, is that people in today's career will have to have multiple careers. They have to reskill multiple times in their life. So we've got to have that ability for people to be able to reskill. And the finances that the government can help to provide the finances, whether you call it an individual learning account or an individual skills account, that they can actually use to reskill through their lives and to adapt to the fast changing world that we're living in, driven a lot by technology. And reskilling is going to be crucial, including to address what you're talking about.
Just to follow up on what you just said, because I mean, this really speaks to the heart of some of what I do. So, the ability to reskill goes beyond just access to courses. There seems to be something of a core skill in people, in the same way that some people are more resilient, some people are more gritty, that makes them more adaptable. And, and people who are interested in kind of teaching these core skills would argue that they should be on secondary school curriculum. So alongside English and maths, we should be teaching kids about creativity, adaptability, and, how they can actually move around from different skill sets as they grow older. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that we should stay with the traditional curriculum?
Well, what you've just said is music to my ears. What I often, when I give talks or lectures around the world, I will ask a question to the audience, and I say to them, how many of you think you are creative? And on average around the world, less than half the hands, whether it's a group of 50 people or whether it's 1,000 people, less than half the hands go up. And I say the reason I ask you this question is, I was told during my childhood, when I was brought up in India, at school, my parents told me, Karan, you're doing well academically, keep going, you'll do well, but you're not creative. Why? I was useless at art, and I was forced to play the piano, and I passed grade 1, and then they said, please give up, spare us, you're tone deaf, you're not creative. So I went through my whole schooling, my university, thinking, believing, and being told I was not creative. And it's only when I started my own business as an entrepreneur that I realized that one of the most important skills of being an entrepreneur and one of the most important skills in life is the ability to be creative. And I'm actually very, very creative in spades. And it had been suppressed throughout my youth. What a waste. I mean, if only we can encourage our children from a very young age to have that confidence to be creative. Whether they become civil servants or entrepreneurs, it's going to be of huge benefit to what they do and to their economy of their countries. And that's what I tell the audiences. Those of you who didn't put your hands up, believe you me, every one of you has the ability to be creative. Just unleash it. And it's so powerful. And we got to do that from a very young age. So you're spot on.
Fantastic. I think we agree on two things. So firstly, that it should be taught in schools, but I was deemed not creative because I was really bad at knitting. I grew up in Ireland. So I can see that you have loads of questions. I'm going to pass it to you now, yes. Karina.
Lovely. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So some very interesting questions here. Now, do you believe that quotas, by having targets or quotas, it makes those people who are appointed have a lower voice? It backfires against them.
There's always this balance between, do you force something through education, or do you encourage something by being the right thing to do? And so what we've spoken about, the women on boards, the government could have legislated for it. Instead, it said, no, let's have a report that says it should be done and why it's a good thing for it to be done. Let's set a target and let business achieve that target on their own. And then through the championing, we've got that. So we've exceeded the target now. I mean, I've seen it myself. I was a senior independent director of Booker, which is the biggest wholesaler in the country. And when I joined the board, and in 2007, it was a £300 million value AIM-listed company. And I was the first element of diversity on that board, all white male. Then, no women. A year later, a woman joined the board. A couple of years later, another woman joined the board. So suddenly from zero diversity, there were 3 of us. So that 1/3 of the board was diverse. That company went from being a £300 million company, and I was senior independent director for 9 years. I rolled off and we merged into Tesco. It's now part of Tesco. At the time, it was almost FTSE 100 with a valuation of £4 billion. And I saw that diversity in action, and it makes such a huge, huge difference. So I think no one forced that on Booker. It happened, and you could see it working. Same thing with what I'm doing now, change the race ratio, not legislation. We're going to do it because it's the right thing to do and the best thing to do.
Somebody here has said, Karina has mentioned the lack of individuals with privileged backgrounds on boards. So should social class become a protected class by employment law like race and gender?
The most important thing is to have an environment in a country, and whether you take it as a country or a company, where anyone can flourish, and someone can start from a privileged background, someone can start from extreme poverty in extreme examples, and they have the equal opportunity to be able to get to the very top. And again, I can give you story after story. I'll tell you one very quick story. There were 2 young boys in South India and Kerala, state in the South India, many years ago, 2 brothers. One got a place at the closest school to their village, was 6 kilometers away. They would walk to school. The younger brother didn't get a place. He would sit outside the older brother's classroom. It was a hut. And the older brother would pass the textbooks through his window. to his younger brother, it's the only way that young boy, bless you, could start to learn. And eventually, of course, he got into school. He was so bright, he got a scholarship to the LSE. It took his family 1 year just to raise the money for the travel and his clothing, just to get him to England to study at the LSE. He did brilliantly at the LSE, went back to India and joined the Indian Foreign Service, rose to the top, and then eventually he became the first ever Dalit. They used to call them untouchables. The first Dalit president of India, President Narayana. And I had the privilege of knowing him. That shows you can get from anywhere to anywhere in life if you have the opportunity. And the LSE has played a part in that.
Well, we certainly have. So I'm very glad that that story of yours involved the LSE and not one of your other universities like Cambridge or Birmingham. Another question here is, what do you think of companies who indicate that they take a colorblind approach to diversity and inclusion?
The companies are now trying to recruit, in many cases, on a blind basis. And you see that in varying degrees of whether they don't know anything of the background of the person, and they try and recruit on that basis. So there's no bias, there's no unconscious bias, and all those practices have been building up over the years. But I think this is a case where companies have to be very conscious that there is an issue here where we do need to change the race ratio, and they need to be aware of it and do whatever they can to encourage it and enable it.
What is your opinion on 100 black interns?
Well, I'm fortunate to say that the CBI is championing not 100, it's 10,000 black interns. It has just been relaunched as 10,000 black interns, and I'm very proud of the CBI to be endorsing it. And it's a fantastic initiative.
Would you actually kind of tell us a bit about it, just because some of our audience may not know what it's about?
Yes, so companies commit to taking on a black intern into their companies, and we've got loads of companies who've signed up to it. And we at the CBI ourselves are going to be participating in the program ourselves. So it's one of those things like change the race ratio, where you sign up to it, you commit to it, and it's not just talk, it's action.
What is your, the question here is, one of the reasons given for low numbers of women on board, and ethnic minorities too, is that there is a shortage of appropriately qualified candidates. Please, can you give your views on this?
Well, this is one where I'm sorry, this saying, oh, there isn't the pipeline. There very much is. You've just got to look for it, and you just got to enable it. And I'm sorry, there are so many BAME and women who are more than up to, they've just got to be given the opportunity. And it's, when people say that, I think they're missing the point altogether, because they're wrong. And increasingly, there's more and more of a pipeline.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure you're aware of it. You've got to look for it. You've got to give the opportunity. You benefit from it, and no question about that.
Why, this is actually turned into a sort of a wider business view. Why do you think the UK has so few major tech businesses and nothing on the scale of the FANGs?
We've got to, again, put this into context. Yes, America, Silicon Valley, what they've achieved has been absolutely extraordinary. The pioneering, the scale of the Googles of this world, the Amazons of this world, is phenomenal. And there's no running away from it. But we as well have done pretty well. I mean, I think in the UK are now considered one of the most entrepreneurial countries in the world. London is one of the most entrepreneurial cities in the world. We are creating unicorns by the dozen. And we have, what we've got to also enable, I was just on the Universities and Business Task Force on Research and Development and Innovation. And one of our recommendations we've just reported this month is that we should have more clusters. So for example, the best example of cluster that we have is Cambridge, where you have the Cambridge cluster, with Cambridge University, one of the world's best universities, and other education institutions there as well, feeding off the businesses, the angel community, the tech community. You had Acorn that came out of it, Arm that came out of it, And wait for this, AstraZeneca, British-Swedish company, where is their global headquarters? It's in Cambridge. And who have AstraZeneca partnered with to get this vaccine? Oxford University. So you have this university business collaboration cluster approach that is so powerful. And we need to encourage more and more of those. And then we will continue to get more of these unicorns. And hopefully we'll get something of the scale of one of the FANGs coming out of Britain one day.
Another question here is, the city recently had its Green Horizon Summit, and it was looking at what incredible business opportunity there is in the environment and how the UK can actually lead on this. What is the CBI's view?
Thank you for that question. Well, again, I think that, again, at a time of crisis, ironically, you look at it historically, it's at times of crisis that initiatives can be launched that can be transformational. Look back at the Second World War. The Beveridge Report was commissioned in 1942, right in the midst of this horrendous war. And what happened after the war finished in 1945? The Beveridge Report was implemented, and it transformed the future of this country with the creation of the National Health Service and the welfare state. Similarly, if you look now, the government is prioritizing the green agenda. It's got this 10-point plan the Prime Minister's announced. The UK is hosting COP26 next year in Glasgow a year from now. The CBI is playing a major role in that. And we launched in July this year the CBI's Heat Commission. I would urge you to look at it. I chaired that commission. Ironically, by the way, it was the University of Birmingham. That was CBI's choice, not my choice. That was the partner for this with our energy professors, as well as industry leaders in the sector. And the Heat Commission report, for example, most people don't know this, heat makes up 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And over half that comes from buildings, like houses. The 29 million houses in this country, only 1 million are up to standard. If we do not change them from gas boilers to hydrogen to heat pumps, we're not going to achieve our net zero target by 2050. So we can show leadership in that. Wind farm and wind power. Britain is a world leader in wind power. So now we can go into COP26 as leaders in things like heat and things like wind power. Hydrogen. At University of Birmingham, we've just released the first hydrogen-powered train that is running as we speak right now.
In fact, Julie, going back to what you said about the houses that all need to be converted, I mean, that's one hell of a lot of jobs one can get going on the back of that.
Absolutely. So what we've said is we need an Olympic-style delivery authority to implement this changing all these houses across, which means you need to reskill almost 1 million engineers and employ new people. So it creates new jobs. Yes, there's an investment in it, but in the long run, it's a huge cost-benefit advantage as well as the environmental advantage.
And the government, presumably, the way it could also help facilitate would be tax incentives for people to do this?
Government can make all sorts of incentives. One of the other recommendations we're making, again, as we speak, is rates, to reform the rate system. So if somebody has made an investment into making their building, their office, their house more environmentally friendly, then the government should help out on that by giving some rates relief on that to encourage it and help out. Yes, the government can do fiscal. There can be many advantages from the government side as well to help with that.
Karen, thank you so much for that. One could have gone on for quite a while, and I'm going to ignore some of the other questions that have been coming up because we have no time. But a huge thank you for fitting us into a mega busy diary. That was a very illuminating talk, but also very inspirational. Very inspirational. So we can all go off and have a lovely lunch on the back of it. We look forward to having you here, let's say in 2 years, so that you could inform us of all the progress that has been made with the Change the Race ratio, a program that is admirable and that we hope to be involved in as the Inclusion Initiative. For the audience, thank you for participating. Do tune in for our next Open Door, Open City webinars with Dr. Alice Maynard, a board member at the FCA, the financial regulator, and a campaigner on disability. Vivian Arts, Chief Privacy Officer at Refinitiv and President of Women in Banking and Finance, and Alderman Tim Hales, who's likely to be the city's first openly gay Lord Mayor. From all of us here at the Inclusion Initiative, with many thanks to our guest, Lord Karan Bilimoria, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you, Grace. And thank you to the LSE. Thank you very much.
Thank you.